Hey, what's up everybody? Greetings to the VC community once again. It is still early January and I am going to jump in on another Vinyl Tag 2023. This time courtesy of Dillon over at Noble Records. Keep appreciating the videos, man, and thought this would be a perfect thing to kind of keep the train rolling. So we're going to do Vinyl Tag 2023, the sequel. Alright, 20 questions. Nice and different from what we did before. And let's get kicked off. Best find. Best find, you know, we didn't say best grail, high dollar find, just best find. And at the very end of the year down in Florida, not something I was necessarily looking for, although I'm always looking for great 70s funk. Boom. Original People Records copy of the JBs, doing it to death. I mean, just straight heat. If you know it, you know it. And if you don't, get acquainted. Yeah, love it. Guys who backed the James Brown experience. Next up, we got recently discovered, relatively recently. You know, last year was just deep dive into a lot of UK post-punk and US kind of post-punk new wave. And another little genre that's connected would be kind of like a synth punk genre. And the Units, or not the Units, but just Units rather, they definitely fit the category. And this is like their second record kind of. It's more of a EP, it's a 6-track. This is a gold stamp promo. Sounds incredible. And it's a little bit more new wave punky than it is like more angular post-punk synth punk like their first album. I don't have an original copy of their first one yet. Hope to source it, you know, sometime soon. The big track on that first record would be High Pressure Days. Really dig that tune, and then that just kind of got me digging, listened to that first album online, then found this. They also, their true full LP, the second one, never really made it. It was recorded, and due to some contractual stuff or record label stuff, I don't know all the details, it never was released back in the 80s. But recently it's been unearthed and reissued. I forget the label that reissued it, but if you look online, do a little digging for the Units, you'll see they have like 2 color waves of this kind of last ditch effort that the Units made. Really cool album. If you like, you know, new wave, synth punk, anything in that genre, this would definitely be an under the radar EP. New Way to Move. A lot of killer cuts. Next up, we just have a perfect album. I mean, I try to just keep the cream of the crop in my collection these days. I've definitely whittled down to, you know, 400 or 500 records. And as soon as I saw this one, I was like, yep, all killer, no filler. I mean, just smoking good from start to finish. This is an original US pressing, and it is truly a AAA cut, and it is Rage Against the Machine. They're self-titled. I mean, straight fire. That's really all you can say about it. If you know it, you know it. Alright, what do we got next? We're going to get on to the emotional tip. Song that made you cry, or an experience with a record that made you cry maybe. So, I think early last year at some point I picked up the White Album, the stereo remaster, the anniversary one. You know, the Beatles are a strange animal in that there's so many pressings, and I'm such kind of a cursed audiophile, perfectionist freak about stuff that I've kind of avoided picking up a lot of Beatles stuff over the years, just because you never know, like, is this one worthwhile? Is it worth the money? You know, just condition issues. There's a million factors to think about when you're considering picking up Beatles records. And so I said, you know, what the heck? I heard some good stuff about this. I was like, it might not be the end all be all. I missed out on a German early 70s Apple pressing a while back online that I was really wanting to grab. Didn't do it. Went with this. And you know, I have a pretty good setup, high-end cartridge, really reveals a lot. And I put on the first LP, and when the jets fade out from back in the USSR, you hear the beginnings of Dear Prudence kind of sparkle in to your ears. And I was just sitting here in a quiet record room all by myself, and I really felt like I was back at Abbey Road. I felt like I was just hanging out on like an old Persian rug or something, and on the other side of the glass was John Lennon. And it was just a powerful and emotional experience. Definitely got me a little teared up. Love that song, love this album. Probably overall, start to finish, my favorite Beatles album would be this. And you know, we all know, probably the greatest to ever do it, considering what they put out in the time frame they put it out. And I mean, just the sonic quality of this and the beauty of it. It was like you were in the studio with John and the fellas, and it was pretty awesome. So that was my shed a tear moment. Next up, we have terrible cover art. This might not be the worst cover art in the world, but not a big fan of it. I just, you know, I kind of get where they were going. Love this band. Of the first 4 Devo records, consequently, this is probably my least favorite of the 4. But, you know, still have it in the collection. There's a couple cool tunes on it, but just not my favorite. When you think about, you know, their first cover, whether it's the German UK version or, you know, the infamous yellow covered US version, or if you think about Barcode cover, if you think about the New Traditionalists, which was, I believe, after this. I mean, just true punk in so many ways. Fantastic band. Couple cool cuts on this record, but the Spuds vibe, I don't really dig it. Never Punched Out, though. It's got the easel back rear to the LP, which is pretty neat. Won't be displaying it, though. Next up, I'm going to kind of smash 2 together here. We got number 7 is Guilty Pleasure, and number 6 is an LP that would surprise your friends. 7, Guilty Pleasure. So 6 and 7 we're going to sandwich together. Definitely kind of a guilty pleasure, if you want to call it that, is rocking the beautiful early 80s Madonna stuff. This isn't her early stuff, but I got a ton of her 12-inch 45s, and me and the kids, or if I'm just in the 80s vibe, just throwing on these awesome 12-inch 45s. They sound great, and I mean, you know, just 80s pop perfection. Great, you know, songwriting, killer hooks. I mean, just, you know, everything you could want if you're into that kind of vibe. And it's kind of one of my little guilty pleasures, is getting down with some Madonna. My favorite 12-inch is probably the Lucky Star Borderline Twofer. That's a killer one. That's probably my first go-to. This one's good, and I got a bunch of other ones too. So here we go. So since we sandwiched, we are going to jump to number 8. Took forever to find. I've had this for quite a few years now, I think. Time Out with a German Pilsner from Resident Culture here in Charlotte, North Carolina, a couple hours from me. One of the best producers of lagers in the state, and one of my all-time favorites from them, Radical Empathy. If you're in this area, in this region, and you can get a hold of it, and you like lagers and pilsners, get on that. Anyway, back to the programming. This record eluded me for so long, and it's probably my favorite from this band. And at the beginning of a record show a few years back, I think in Florida, Orlando area, found this really nice original copy of Talking Heads, Remain in Light. Just stellar. You got the world beat vibe, you got the African edge, you got, you know, David and the crew just, killing it start to finish. Cross-eyed and Painless. Born Under Punches, Once in a Lifetime. It's just, what a record. Love it. Original US sounds fantastic. All right, next up we got Animal on the cover. That's number 11. I was digging through, saw a couple options. Not a lot really, considering how many albums I have, I guess. But went with something I recently picked up from a band I absolutely love. And one of their albums is on my Holy Grail list, which is only about 3 or 4 records. And that's the Wood Brothers. This is 2 albums back now, maybe 3. I haven't loved their last 1 or 2 as much as their first 4 or 5. Paradise, this is really good though. A couple standout tracks would be Singing to Strangers kicks off the album. American Heartache is fantastic. That's the second track. Heartbreak Lullaby, I think, starts off the B-side with really good. It's if you don't know the Wood Brothers, it's the Wood Brothers and a percussion guy, and at least in the early days it was just the 2 Wood Brothers, but their first album, Ways Not to Lose, is unbelievable. It's never been released on vinyl. Their second album is really hard to find. That's my grail. That one is called Loaded. That's on Blue Note, and it's just really hard to find, and one sold right around Christmas just last month, and I missed it. I was on vacation, wasn't tracking with Discogs much, and I was sad to see that miss out there. But Wood Brothers, folk Americana, singer-songwriter, tinge of gospel here and there thrown in, especially on the earlier stuff. Man, Chris and Oliver. Chris Wood is most famous from being the bass player for many years in Medeski, Martin and Wood, and then the Wood Brothers have been doing their thing for many years now. So, great album, Paradise. Next up we have a record or album with a story, and I got a great story. When I went to see Nirvana, I got to go see Nirvana, and I think it was Dayton or Toledo, Ohio. No, it was Akron. I think it was Akron, Ohio. Halloween night, just several months before Kurt died. So it's Halloween night. My best friends were brothers, Ryan and Ian. They lived on my street. They had a kind of a big family, and one of their uncles was a drummer in a rockabilly band up there in the Cleveland area where I'm from. I think the Cow Slingers was the name of the band. Anyway, cool uncle and his girlfriend take me and my 2 buddies, Ryan and Ian, their nephews, to see Nirvana. It's Halloween night. We get out to Akron. We stop at a McDonald's to get a drink or go to the bathroom or something before we get to the venue. And we get back in the car, and everyone's laughing, and the uncle's girlfriend has a giant toilet paper roll, a commercial roll, from the bathroom that she stole for no good reason. But, we were kids. We thought it was hilarious. I was probably 13 and a half at the time, pretty young. Definitely my biggest, huge first concert, probably most memorable for what transpired later. But anyway, we get to the venue. The band's getting ready to come out. You can feel the tension. I mean, the place was electric. It was packed in. It was not a huge venue. I think it was between, I guess it would have been the Heart Shaped Box tour, or thereabouts, because it was at the end of his life. So anyway, the lights go down, and dancing out on the stage is a giant purple dinosaur. Yep, that one. You get Barney just dancing around goofy on stage. It was Kurt in that getup. Chris, the bass player, was dressed like Slash from Guns N' Roses, had this huge kind of long afro curl wig situation, big black top hat, big old cigarette, bottle of Jack Daniels. I mean, it was hilarious. They were just goofing around, kind of dilly-dallying around the stage. They go off the stage. A few minutes later, they get regular. They come back out. Chris has the same bottle of Jack Daniels. He cracks the top, plugs it, rips probably a third to a half of the bottle, who knows, in one frickin' shot. whips it straight up into the air, lets it come down and just shatter on the stage, and they just rip into the opening track, which I want to say was a Nevermind cut, and maybe it was In Bloom or something. I can't remember. I'd have to look it up. And which I did, by the way, because I was like, do I remember this crazy story right, or is it just in my mind? Am I embellishing? No. There's notations on the archive sites for Nirvana's live shows about, you know, the costume situation and all that. I mean, what a cool thing to be able to see Nirvana with Kurt before his untimely death. One of my all-time favorite bands. This is the Bernie Grundman cut. A lot of people have heard about it. Pressed at Palace. I got 2 different pressings of it, actually, a silver and a black. Black one's the best sounding. Like to get an original one day, but man, what a story, what a concert, and what a band. Alright, next up. LP from a Faraway Land. Don't have a ton of like crazy world music or anything, but I scored just a honey hole one time from a buddy's record shop years ago in Florida of reggae stuff. Mostly original Jamaican pressings, some early kind of like first pressings that came out of Canada and stuff. And this is one of the rare ones. It's a beautiful album. Treasure Isle LP 007, The Paragons with Rosalind Sweat. They kick things off covering Blackbird by the Beatles. They do a few other covers and some originals, but just beautiful, you know, female vocal led, easy breezy, Jamaican, just, you know, Rasta kind of rock steady music. Really cool to have this in the collection. It's apparently a pretty rare record. For a long time there had never been any on Discogs sold. I think now there's been 1 or 2 or whatever, but you don't see it very much. So I was thrilled to get it, the Paragons. Alright, after that we have latest Rabbit Hole. I don't have any LPs to show for this because other than the kind of deep dive post-punk new wave jam situation going last year, I would say lately I'm kind of rabbit holing cassettes and cassette decks. I don't have a cassette deck. I did procure one for my daughters for their Christmas present. Got a nice little Vintage Techniques deck, and I've really been enjoying listening to tapes with them in their room, and you know, it just got me thinking that there's some really high dollar stuff, particularly stuff from the 90s, that is probably going to sound great on cassette, and it's going to be a fraction of the price to get it on cassette instead of vinyl. And eventually if I come across an original, you know, pressing of albums like 10 from Pearl Jam that I don't yet have, or, you know, the 320 cut of Super Unknown from Europe that is one of my top 3 grails, yeah, I'll buy it, I'll spend the money. But you know, until that time comes, why not have a great analog way to enjoy that music at home or even on the go with maybe a Walkman or something. And so that's kind of my rabbit hole right now, is poking around with getting a vintage cassette deck and starting to procure some cassettes to go along with it. So next up, back to the LPs, we have Artwork Does Not Match the Music. This is just a beautiful album. This could have been, I think technically it came out in 21, so it didn't make my top 22 list or whatever from the last video, but just beautiful painter. Apparently he's well known. I think he's European. He did this album cover and all the artwork. He did this cover. He did the inserts. This is the limited colored version. He did all the artwork for all the 7 inches that came with the limited edition that I picked up of this album. And I haven't been tracking much with Sufjan Stevens. I mean, I love his earlier stuff, especially, you know, his peak, I think, which was, you know, Illinois and Michigan, and The Age of Ads. Just, I mean, killer records. But this is just a gorgeous kind of mood ambient, mixed with singer-songwriter, folky aspects. And it's kind of a themed record where they watched a bunch of classic films and stuff during the pandemic, and they wrote a bunch of songs to go with those movies. So each song is, correlated to one of the films. And side A in particular is just beautiful. It's really, really awesome stuff. So if you get a chance to give a listen to A Beginner's Mind, it's Sufjan Stevens and Angelo D'Agustin, both from Asthmatic Kitty. All right, next we have Best Bargain Find. I would not consider this a bargain album by any stretch, but I was at a record show 3-4 months ago and get to the one guy's little booth area, and I was just kind of like, hey, this is what I'm looking for, mainly post-punk, new wave, 80s stuff, a couple other things, and just, hey, do you got anything like that? Yeah, probably a few things, but he's like, everything's just kind of thrown together, right? It's like, all right. Not my favorite way to dig. I really appreciate when people kind of, curate a little bit and at least kind of have things in sections and whatnot, so you kind of know where you want to chase. So, start looking around. And as soon as I start looking, the guy like next to me, shoulder to shoulder, is like, hey, I saw a pylon in there. I was like, really? He's like, yeah, I thought about grabbing it, but I was like, I'll leave it for the next guy. An original of their second full-length Chomp Pylon. Them and the B-52s, by far my favorite Georgia bands from the era of the 80s. I have their first one. I have this. I also have this killer 7-inch, which both these tracks, Cool and Dub, are not on the first album, so this is a must-have. I don't buy a ton of 7-inch stuff, but there's always exceptions to that rule, and that's one of them. But anyway, original, it's got the die-cut top. I was just thrilled. I think it was $10 or something, which, I know that's not $1 or whatever, but that's cheap for something of this quality. The condition is phenomenal. The record's in great condition. Just thrilled to grab that. Thought that was the bargain of the year for me. All right. A band or album that takes you back. There was a couple different ways I was going to go with this. I was thinking teenage years. I was thinking, younger years. I was thinking late teens, early 20s. There's those kind of cataclysmic shifts in our life and just poignant moments or seasons. And, for me at least, there's always been music attached to that, even at my youngest days. And so I decided to go with probably the youngest, standout memory in band. And that would be by far my first serious, favorite band of all time. Just was crazy in love with them. I think the first cassette I ever got was Young MC with Bust a Move. Cool cassette, right? But after that, I got Appetite for Destruction. I was probably 8 years old. This album, I remember having it on cassette. I remember being on the floor in my living room, in my bedroom, listening on my Walkman. And I had the shell open, I had the J card of the cassette, unfolded, and it has that, infamous painting of the girl on the fence with the robot and the crazy monster coming over the fence. And my mom saw that and she was not happy, and she confiscated the cassette. Several years later, at the age of maybe 12 or 13, she confiscated one of my GNR shirts, and was super pissed about that, of course. But in that season, just remember just being into the glam rock, hard rock 80s stuff, and GNR was it for me. And then when this came out, I remember having it on cassette and just listening to it so much on cassette. I remember just walking around the backyard at my mom's friend's house because she was hanging out visiting her friend, and I was just bored, so I was just in the backyard on my little Sony Walkman, rocking out GNR Lies. Not really appropriate 8 or 9 year old music looking back, But I mean, I think the pinnacle of American late 80s hard rock, Guns N' Roses, Poison, Motley Crue, there's a lot of great ones. Guns N' Roses for me was it, and it really just brings me back thinking about those early days and really what was formative in starting my musical journey, which is still going to this day. So, all right, a couple more to go. 18 is Wild Card. Found this recently, knew nothing about it. It was right in my wheelhouse for the genre I've been really digging, which is that post-punk stuff. And this little outfit, I believe, is from Massachusetts. And this is a pretty rare original pressing of Lou Miami. And I believe his band is called, let's see here. I know it's somewhere around here. The Cosmetics. So this, I believe, is their very first. They didn't have a lot of stuff that was even released ever, but this is their original EP. It is Modern Method Records, Boston, Mass. Death with Dance, New Romantics, and Vehicle for Love by far are my favorite cuts. He also covers the classic Monster Mash. But I love when I find stuff like this. You just never knew it existed till that day. Gave it a quick listen online, really dug it, and I was like, wow. To find this, has the original insert with it, the vinyl's in great shape, just a little small time label, Modern Method Records. I just love small private label stuff like this when it sounds that great. It's a win all the way around. So look up Lou Miami and the Cosmetics and those tracks, and I think you'll dig it if you're into that kind of stuff. All right, 19, album or artist you just can't seem to get into. Well, I got a few original pressings of this band and this famous singer, and that is Susie and the Banshees. I have this. I have a couple other original US's which are in the bin to sell at the next record show. They're in beautiful shape too, and it's just, I don't know what it is. I can get into some stuff with some gothic edge to it, but I've just not fallen in love with this band. I thought about Wire too. I have their original Pink Flag album, and I like some of the cuts off Wire's second and third album. That's why I decided to go this route instead. Sure, there's a lot of fans out there, no hate, nothing but love. But I just can't get down too much with Sushi and the Banshees. So there you go. Alright, so last but not least, the vinyl aspirations that we have for 2023. So a few things. Firstly, I just want to stay true to kind of where I've already been at, especially the second half of 2022. And that's just being focused and, going to record shows and, just being intentional about what you're after, what I want to buy, getting the pieces I really want to fit and fill into my collection, and also, picking up new stuff that you just stumble across, sure, but being, smart about that too, check it out, give it a quick listen online. If it's something that really does jump out, then grab it, and if it doesn't, just move on, there's always another day, there's always another million records to check out. Secondly, I alluded to this a little bit before, that would be the cassette thing. Particularly like the early mid 90s, just grunge, alternative stuff that's just hard to come by, it's expensive. If I can get killer analog cuts on cassette to placehold at least, while I'm slowly kind of procuring some of that stuff and fitting it into the collection, I think I'm going to do that. You can get a pretty decent vintage deck for not a lot of money. And, I'm going to rock some tapes and see what I think about that. And, if it just doesn't hold up to my love for vinyl, then maybe I'll just move on. But I'm going to give that a little go maybe here and keeping my eye out for some of that. So, lastly, original, gritty, funk, and some original, early blues stuff. I would love to fill out my collection a little bit more with some of that stuff. I have a few things in the funk genre and a couple things maybe in the blues category. Not a big jazz guy, but I do love that early, just gritty, black funk, and also just, Lightning Hopkins and that sort of like classic blues stuff. Just, would like to hunt some of that stuff down or come across it and score it if I can. So we'll see what 2023 brings on that stuff. So appreciate you watching, those of you that have. Stick with me, have mercy. I'm brand new at this. Hopefully next time around maybe I'll just do like a little specific dive on, a band or something like that. Might do a little gear tour, talk about some of my stuff a little bit, and my journey maybe with the hi-fi stuff that's kind of coincided with this record journey over the last decade or so. So hope you guys have a great week coming up, and grace and peace.